It was just another ordinary Tuesday evening at the upscale restaurant. The kind of place where suits and silk dresses brushed against each other and fine wines poured like liquid gold. The ambiance was impeccable. Soft lighting, a subtle jazz band playing in the corner, and waitstaff who moved like silent shadows, attending to their guests' every need. And then there was Mia. She wasn't like the others who worked here. Her uniform, slightly too big for her, seemed to add weight to her frail frame. Her shoes had worn-out soles that creaked with every step, and the forced smile she gave guests never quite reached her eyes. She was the kind of waitress who blended into the background, unnoticed unless you happened to see the tiredness in her eyes. No one ever asked her name. She was just one of the countless servers who helped create the illusion of luxury. But tonight was different. Tonight, she would meet James Harrington, the millionaire who owned half of the city. Mia had heard of him, of course. Who hadn't? He was everywhere, on the covers of magazines, at charity events, and in the whispers of the restaurant's high-end clientele. James Harrington was known for his lavish lifestyle and his icy demeanor. He didn't mix with people like her. In fact, he never even glanced at anyone from her world. But tonight, fate had different plans. He had made a reservation for a private dinner. Mia's heart raced as she was assigned to serve his table. She had heard rumors that Mr. Harrington was a difficult customer, demanding, never satisfied, and always with an air of superiority. Mia adjusted her apron and smoothed back her brown hair, making sure to hide the nervousness that threatened to bubble over. Just get through it. You've served the rich before. You can do this. She walked over to his table with a tray in hand, her breath caught in her chest. James Harrington sat alone, a glass of wine in front of him, his sharp blue eyes scanning a menu. He didn't look up as she approached. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington. May I take your order?" Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled slightly. He didn't immediately respond. Instead, he looked up at her slowly, his eyes locking onto hers in a way that made her feel small and insignificant, like a bug under a magnifying glass. His gaze was intense, piercing, and it made her wonder if he could see every flaw, every insecurity she carried with her. His lips curled into a small, indifferent smile, but it felt more like a challenge than a welcome. "I'll have the lobster bisque," he said coldly, never breaking eye contact. Mia nodded, her face flushing. She turned to leave, but before she could walk away, his voice stopped her. "Wait!" She hesitated, her hand still on the tray, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Tell me," he began, his voice still as cold as the wine in front of him. "What's it like? Working here? In a place like this?" She blinked, taken aback by the unexpected question. What did he mean by that? No one had ever asked her that before. They treated her like part of the furniture, always there, always doing her job, but never seen. "It's..." Mia searched for the right words. "It's just a job," she finally said, offering him a weak smile. He seemed to consider this for a moment and then, without another word, he turned his attention back to the menu, as if the conversation had never happened. Mia, feeling the sting of his dismissal, quickly walked away to place his order in the kitchen, trying to push the unease that had crept into her chest. Have you ever felt like you were invisible in a room full of people? How did it make you feel? As Mia went about her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different tonight. She kept glancing back at James, who was still sitting alone at his table, looking every bit the powerful, untouchable man he was known to be. The way he carried himself, like the world owed him something, was unsettling. She didn't know why, but she felt drawn to him. Not in the way that people were often attracted to the wealthy or famous, but in a way that felt more like curiosity. What could a man like him possibly want with someone like her? But as the night wore on, Mia found herself forced into a different kind of confrontation, one that had nothing to do with James Harrington. It was something far worse, something she had feared every day since starting at the restaurant. As she refilled a guest's wine glass near the back of the dining room, she spotted him. Jake. He sat at the bar, his eyes scanning the room, waiting. She didn't need to be told what he was looking for. He was always there, always watching. Jake was her ex. He had been trouble from the moment she met him. He had a temper that could ignite in an instant, and he had made her life a living hell. The worst part? He still thought they had unfinished business, and tonight, of all nights, he had decided to show up. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she hurried to the kitchen, trying to avoid eye contact. She could feel his gaze like a weight pressing against her back. The thought of him being so close to her, so near the man she had once dreamed of being with, made her feel sick. She wouldn't let him ruin her night. But then, just as she turned the corner, she heard a voice. "Please." The voice was soft but pleading. "Please, don't go." It was James. He had followed her into the kitchen. Mia froze. She turned to face him, unsure of what he wanted now. Her mind was racing, and she could feel the color drain from her face as panic set in. "I didn't want you to think I was rude earlier," he said, his eyes now softer, though still carrying that weight of mystery. "You seemed distracted. Is everything all right?" Mia swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't tell him about Jake, or about how she had barely escaped him before. "Just a personal matter," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. James didn't seem convinced. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing, before he stepped closer. Way too close. "Listen," he said, his voice now serious. "I can tell when someone's hiding something, and I can tell you're scared. If you need help, if there's anything I can do, please don't hesitate to ask." Mia's breath hitched in her chest. This was the moment. She could feel it. There was something in the air, something that pulled her in. She wanted to say something, anything that would stop the pain, the weight of her past that hung around her like a shadow. But then, just as quickly as he had appeared, James turned and began to walk away, leaving her standing there, alone with her thoughts. What would you have done if you were Mia? Would you have accepted James's offer for help? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. As the night carried on, Mia tried her best to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to that moment. James Harrington had seen something in her. He had offered to help her, even though they were from entirely different worlds. The strange thing was, she had almost believed him, and it terrified her. The days following that strange encounter were a blur for Mia. She couldn't stop thinking about James Harrington, his cold, sharp exterior, and that moment of softness when he had offered her help. It was a gesture that didn't match the man she had heard about it. It didn't match the world he lived in. People like him didn't offer help to people like her. They didn't even notice people like her. But somehow, James had seen her. And that thought kept her awake at night. Mia knew she should have brushed it off. She should have let the moment slip away into the background like every other encounter she had with the rich and powerful. But she couldn't. Not this time. Something had shifted inside her. Maybe it was the way he had looked at her, as if he understood more than she had let on. Or maybe it was the vulnerability she had seen in his eyes, though he had quickly masked it with his usual indifference. Days turned into weeks, and Mia continued her work at the restaurant, but her mind often wandered back to that night. It was during one of her late shifts, and as she wiped down tables and rearranged napkins, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. "Mia?" Her breath caught in her throat as she heard his voice. "James Harrington." "I know this might sound strange," he continued, "but I need your help." Mia's heart skipped a beat. His help? She didn't even know how to respond. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You need my help?" "I'm hosting a charity event in a few weeks," he explained, his tone serious but not cold. "It's a gala, and I want to make sure it runs smoothly. I need someone who understands how to handle people, someone who isn't afraid to step up and take control of the situation. You're the first person who came to mind." Mia was taken aback. This was absurd. She wasn't some event planner. She was a waitress. She wasn't even in the same universe as him. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't say no. This was her chance to step into a world she had always dreamed of, even if she didn't belong there. "I'll help," she said, almost surprised at herself for agreeing. James didn't waste any time. The next morning, Mia received an email with the details. There was no turning back now. Have you ever been given a chance that seemed too big for you? How did you handle it? The days leading up to the gala were a whirlwind for Mia. She was thrust into a world she had never imagined. A world of private meetings, luxury venues, and high-profile guests. James had put her in charge of overseeing the logistics for the event, And though she was out of her element, she threw herself into the work with everything she had. She wasn't going to let this slip through her fingers. As the day of the event drew near, Mia felt a mix of excitement and dread. The restaurant had given her time off for the week, but now it felt like her entire life was on the line. She couldn't fail. Not now, when she had finally found a way to break free from the shackles of her ordinary existence. The night of the gala arrived, and Mia stood backstage, watching the guests filter in. She was dressed in a black dress, simple but elegant, the kind of thing she could never afford on her own. She caught glimpses of the people around her, millionaires, celebrities, business magnates. It was all so overwhelming. James was at the front of the room, talking to guests, shaking hands, exuding the same air of untouchable power that he always did. But when his eyes met hers, he gave her a small nod of approval. It was the first time she'd seen him look at her without judgment, and it felt like a victory. As the night wore on, things began to go wrong. There were technical difficulties with the sound system, a few guests were unhappy with their seating arrangements, and the caterers had been delayed. Mia was running around the venue, trying to fix one problem after another, her head spinning. She was in over her head, but she couldn't stop now. James was always nearby, watching her every move. And though his presence loomed like a shadow, she felt oddly reassured by it. He never intervened unless absolutely necessary, but when he did, his suggestions were sharp, focused, and effective. She began to see why he was so successful. He didn't need to do everything himself. He knew how to make the right decisions at the right moments. By the time the event was halfway through, Mia had managed to solve every issue that had arisen. She was exhausted, but she was proud. This was her moment. She could feel the change in her, a confidence she had never known before. She wasn't just some waitress anymore. She was someone who could hold her own in a room full of people who had everything she ever wanted. But then, just as she thought she might finally breathe, disaster struck. The sound system failed again. The guests began murmuring, a ripple of discontent running through the crowd. Mia rushed to the front of the stage, panic flooding her. This was it. This was the moment everything could fall apart. Her hands were shaking, but she stepped forward anyway. "I'll fix it," she told James, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. James looked at her, his eyes narrowed in thought. For a second, she thought he was going to step in, to take control. But instead, he nodded. "You've got this." Mia took a deep breath and walked to the sound booth. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she couldn't let anyone see that. This was her chance to prove herself, not just to James, but to everyone in this room. As Mia worked furiously to fix the sound system, she could feel James watching her, his presence almost like a weight on her shoulders. But this time it was different. Instead of feeling small, she felt empowered. She knew what she was doing, and when the music finally started playing again, she felt a rush of triumph. The rest of the night went smoothly. Mia's confidence grew with every passing minute. By the end of the gala, she had earned the respect of not only James but everyone in the room. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, like she had just crossed an invisible line, from ordinary to extraordinary. The weeks following the gala were a blur of excitement and change for Mia. The success of the event had transformed her life in ways she never thought possible. James had continued to offer her opportunities, more freelance projects, more connections, more invitations to events that only the elite could attend. She was no longer just a waitress, a girl who cleaned tables and took orders. She was becoming part of a world that seemed so far beyond her reach, and with every step, she felt both exhilarated and terrified. But with each passing day, Mia's thoughts grew more complicated. The power of the world she had been thrust into was intoxicating. She was invited to private dinners, rubbed elbows with the city's movers and shakers, and her life, once so ordinary, was beginning to feel extraordinary. And through it all, there was James. Mia hadn't expected the bond that had formed between them. It was subtle at first, small exchanges, occasional words of encouragement, and glances that were more than just polite. But the more they spent time together, the more complicated it became. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that James was looking at her in a way that went beyond mere friendship. He didn't treat her like the others. He didn't see her as someone to use, to discard, or to simply admire from a distance. One evening, as Mia was getting ready to attend another gala, she found herself in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at the reflection of the woman she had become. The dress she wore was one she had never thought she would own, sleek, form-fitting, and designed to make a statement. She was wearing heels that elevated her both literally and figuratively, her hair styled with precision, her makeup flawless. She looked like one of them now. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from James. "Meet me on the terrace in 10 minutes. I need to talk to you about something." Her heart skipped a beat. There was something about his messages lately that made her pulse quicken. The way he phrased his words, "I need to talk to you," felt so deliberate, so intimate. She tried to brush it off, but she couldn't help the flood of anticipation that ran through her. When Mia arrived at the terrace, the city lights below twinkled like 1,000 stars. James was standing by the railing, his back to her as he looked out over the skyline. He was always composed, always in control. But tonight, there was something different. He seemed restless. "Mia," he said as he turned to face her, his voice softer than she remembered. "I've been thinking a lot about you lately. About us." Mia's breath hitched in her throat. She didn't know what to say, how to respond. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, as if they were both waiting for the other to take the first step. He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. There was no coldness now, no distance. His gaze was warm, sincere, and Mia felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She wasn't ready for this, not now, not when her life was still spinning out of control. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, though she knew exactly what he was implying. She wasn't blind. She had felt the tension between them, the subtle pull that had only grown stronger over time. "Mia, I'm not like the others," he said, his voice low, intense. "I've been in this world my whole life, and it's never felt right. But with you, it's different. I don't want to pretend that we don't have something here." Her pulse was racing. She had no idea how to react. Everything in her screamed to step away, to not get involved, to keep her distance. She was just a waitress. She didn't belong in this world. She had never been meant for a man like James, but his words, "With you, it's different," they echoed in her mind over and over, until they felt like a promise she couldn't ignore. Mia took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. "I can't. I'm not like you. I don't belong in your world." James stepped closer again, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. The contact sent a jolt through her. "That's not true, Mia," he said softly. "You don't have to be like me. You just have to be you." "And that's what I want, just you." Mia felt a tear slip down her cheek before she even realized it was there. She had been holding back so much pain, so much fear, so much uncertainty. But with James, everything felt like it could be different. For the first time in years, she felt like someone cared for more than just the surface. As the night wore on, Mia's heart swelled with emotions she couldn't name. She had always been so careful, so guarded. But James had broken down every wall she had built around herself. In that moment, standing on the terrace, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had been holding herself back from happiness all along. But her moment of vulnerability was interrupted by a sharp sound in the distance. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was Jake. Her heart dropped. The moment she had feared the most was now here. Jake was back, and this time, it felt like he wasn't just watching from afar. He was closing in. Mia glanced at James, who was still standing close to her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about the way he looked at her, like he was ready to protect her, to fight for her. And that made her even more afraid. She wasn't used to being fought for. She had always fought her own battles. But now, she wasn't sure she could fight this one alone. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your past and your future? How did you make that decision? Share your thoughts below. Mia's hand trembled as she stared at the phone screen. Jake's name lit up, an unwelcome reminder of the life she was trying to escape. She didn't want to answer it, not now. Not when everything was finally starting to feel like it was within her reach, but she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. She had to face him. James, sensing her unease, leaned in slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't have to answer it if you don't want to," he said, his voice low, filled with understanding. Mia felt a strange rush of gratitude for the way James was respecting her space, giving her the room to make the choice. She had never been in this position before, where someone actually cared about her decision, where she wasn't just expected to keep quiet and accept what came her way. It felt like a weight was lifting from her shoulders, but the fear of what Jake might do still hovered like a storm cloud. With a shaky breath, Mia swiped to answer the call, her voice barely a whisper as she said, "Hello?" On the other end, Jake's voice came through, rough and tinged with an edge she didn't recognize. "Mia, I need to see you. It's important." Her stomach churned. She could feel the old fears creeping up, trying to take over. "I don't think we need to talk, Jake," she replied, trying to sound firm, trying to sound like she had control of the situation. But Jake wasn't hearing it. "No, Mia, you don't get it. You're in too deep now. You think you can just walk away, that you can pretend none of this ever happened, but you can't. You know I can make things worse for you, right?" Her heart pounded in her chest as he spoke. He was threatening her again, the same way he always did, always trying to pull her back into his world, a world full of chaos, manipulation, and control. But now, standing here with James, feeling like her life was actually beginning to shift for the better, Mia didn't want to be that girl anymore. She wasn't going to let Jake drag her back into the darkness. "I'm not doing this, Jake," Mia said, her voice steadier now. "You don't have that power over me anymore. I'm done." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment, and then Jake laughed, a cold, empty sound. "You'll regret this, Mia. You always do. You can't outrun your past." Mia's breath caught in her throat, but she hung up before he could say anything more. She felt a surge of emotion, the relief, the fear, the anger, all crashing through her at once. She had done it. She had finally cut ties with him. James stood silently by her side, watching her with an intensity that made her feel like he was seeing through to the very core of her, but there was no judgment in his eyes, only support. He stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said softly, and Mia found herself nodding, even though her heart was still racing. Reflection. Question. Have you ever cut ties with someone who had a hold on you? How did it feel to finally break free? As the night wore on, Mia felt a quiet sense of triumph begin to settle over her. She had faced her past head-on, and though it was terrifying, she had done it. She wasn't going to let Jake control her anymore. She wasn't going to let anyone control her. James, sensing her need for space, stepped back, giving her room to breathe. "I think you need some time to process," he said, his tone gentle. "But know this, you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here. I'm always here if you need me." Mia nodded, swallowing back the lump in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to people offering their help, let alone a man like James who could have anyone he wanted. But for some reason, he had chosen to be there for her. And that meant more than she could put into words. As the evening progressed, Mia felt a shift inside her. The weight of her past, though still present, no longer felt like an anchor. It was something she could carry with her, something that had shaped her, but it didn't have to define her. Not anymore. The night ended with a final farewell from the gala, the guests trickling out into their luxury cars, and James standing beside her. But before they parted ways, he turned to her, his expression serious, yet soft. "Let's go get coffee," he said. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere we can just talk." Mia hesitated, looking down at her shoes, the evening catching up with her. But there was something in James's eyes, something that made her feel like this wasn't just a chance meeting. This was the beginning of something bigger, something real. And though she was scared, she knew she couldn't walk away from it. They walked together through the streets, the cool night air brushing against their faces as they headed to a quiet little cafe just a few blocks away. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer filled with tension, but with the unspoken understanding that something was changing. Over coffee, they talked about everything. Mia found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, sharing parts of her story she had kept locked away for so long. James listened, his gaze steady, never once interrupting, never once judging. It felt like he was seeing her for who she truly was, and it was both terrifying and freeing. As the conversation drifted to lighter topics, music, movies, their favorite books, Mia felt a sense of normalcy return. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like the world was closing in around her. She felt like she belonged somewhere, with someone who saw her as more than just the sum of her circumstances. But just as the evening began to wind down and they were preparing to leave, James took a deep breath. "Mia, I need to tell you something, he said, his tone suddenly serious again. This, what we've been doing, what we're building, it's more than just chance. I've been wanting to get closer to you for a while, and I think it's time we figure out what that means. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She had known it was coming, but hearing him say it out loud made her breath catch in her throat. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't know how to handle it, but somehow in that moment she knew she had to face it.